Hey sports fans, Coach Nick here, and welcome to B-Ball Breakdown. We're at episode 3 of a 4-part interview I did with Mark Bennett, who's got decades of experience developing a new system of coaching that's needs-centered, and then Alan Keane, who is a Great Britain under-20 head coach, who is executing a lot of what Mark has set up. So we have a discussion between me and them. If you missed episode 2, here is a really good highlight.
He'd been used to a system where he was just told, stand here, and when you get the ball, you do this. And when you get the ball, do this. And all of a sudden, he came into this environment, and it was, okay, I'm interested in the choices. What did you see? What? Sorry, coach? What did you see? I'm interested in what you're seeing and what the choices were open to you and why you made the choice you did. And he was really, what? You're asking me to look for choices? I've just been told to stand here and do this, coach. So, well, that's not what we want anymore.
And if you want to know what episode 3 is about, here's a great snippet talking about the need to avoid results-based coaching and work on more of the process.
So we don't want players outcome-led. I've just lost that pass that didn't come off. The hoop didn't go in, whatever it was. No, I'm not interested. Talk to me about your choices and your execution, because we know it's not always going to come off, but we can learn from that. And also, importantly, and it links into another thing I want to discuss, Nick, is we never want to just talk to players or challenge them when they do something wrong, because all we're doing then is we're getting them to reflect on the very things we don't want them to repeat. Now, importantly, yes, we need to look at that, but if they do something exceptionally well they've never done before and it's been successful, a tactic, a choice, an execution, we need to be nailing on that as well. Talk to me about what just happened then. What made that so more successful than we've ever done before? Because I want you to repeat that. So do you understand what you did there to make that so successful?
Don't forget, we got one more episode next week, and then on Friday, May 8th, we're going to have a live Q&A between me, Mark, and Alan. So make sure to put that on your calendars and don't miss it, because it'll be a great way for you to get more information about what Mark and Alan are practicing, and I guarantee you it will help your coaching. Here's the question I ask most coaches when I'm talking with them and discussing coaching. I'm going to give you the answer because it's a little bit of a vague question, so I want you to help me figure out how to better make this whole point I'm going to make, which is, I'll ask him, what do you think the goal of a coach is during a game? And I always specify game because we should talk about that in a second, game versus practice coaching style. And what I'm looking for, it's hard because it's a vague question, is the goal of a coach, I think, should be to get your players to play as well as they possibly can. And if you have that intention and that goal in mind, and we understand the science behind how players react to, anger and disgust and all those things, you would probably never detonate on a player in a game if your goal really is to get them to play as well as they possibly can, which also goes back to that buy-in part where the players start to believe that all you want to do is have them play as well as they can, and that gets them to buy in. But I feel like it's not as effective. I'm not quite... The question I ask is too vague. I can't quite get where I want to go. It takes me too long. What's your reaction to that? And maybe help me figure out how we could make that point better.
I'm smiling, Nick, because that's what I used to do many years ago. What you're asking there is you're asking a facilitator question when you haven't even established the outcome answer.
Right.
So the outcome answer is I want to win games. What are the facilitators to winning games? And part of that is players having confidence to play at their best, to commit to things, to be relentless. That's the facilitator of the outcome of the winning games. Now, we know we don't want to spend too much time discrediting or challenging the opinion of it's about winning games, because the reality is you cannot guarantee winning games because you have an opposition. They may just play better than you. You could play out your socks, they still might beat you. You might win by 20 and played horrendous. They just played worse. So don't discredit that and go, great, yeah, winning games, but let's backtrack that. What are the facilitators we can control that's going to help us win games? And they'll go, great tactics, execution of great tactics. Okay, excellent. What do you need to be good at, and what do the players need to be good at, and how do you need to read individual players? Are they all the same or different to make that happen? And all of a sudden now you'll get them eventually getting to those connection points, which is your facilitator question. So it's for you understanding, don't ask a facilitator question if you haven't referenced where the outcome's coming from.
Alan, you want to weigh in on that?
My thoughts on that are, Nick, I don't think we can start with the game in mind, because, what you're doing in practice and what you're doing in training comes out of the game anyway. So for us, we would never approach a European Championship with saying, our goal is to win a medal. You know, and it's been frowned upon by our federation. And again, I'm confident enough to back myself with the process that I'm not going to put the weight of that on a player when I can't control that outcome, because Spain might be better than us. You know, Russia might be better than us. So I'm not going to use that as a weight around a player's neck and my own neck at the same point, because we want everyone to be in the healthiest state they can be in. So for me, it's very much peels itself back to what's the best I can do to get the best out of the players with the best they have to give. And it goes back to Mark's definition of what's excellence. It's doing the best you can with what you have in the present moment. And I would like to say I pride myself on keeping players present. I don't always get it right, Nick, but I'm getting it right a lot more now than I've ever done, and I'll continue in that trajectory. But that's where I found my mind drifting as you were asking that question and talking. And I'll share a quick story that might bring it to life a little bit. We played Latvia in a relegation game in the European Championship going back around 6 years ago. And I had to make a key decision with 28 seconds to go. I had to make a key decision. We were down one. It was 32 seconds to go. We were down 1 point. And Latvia had the ball. And we could elect to foul, being down one, or we could elect to let them play it out and get the ball back with 8 seconds and potentially call a timeout. But the ball would have had to be in dead play, because it's not like the American rules, it's FIBA rules. The ball has to be dead to call a timeout. And I made a decision, and we lost the game by 1. And I came back from the Euros, and I spoke to Mark. I speak to Mark after every game, and I'll get into that in a minute, what that support looks like, because for me it's a game changer, Nick. But I'll share that a little bit later. But I came back from the Euros, and I called Mark, and I said to Mark, I think I made a mistake. I think I was the reason we lost that. I think I made a mistake, and it cost us that game, which means we got relegated. And Mark's question to me was, in that moment, did that feel like that was the right thing to do? In other words, did you do the best you could with what you had in that present moment? And I said, absolutely, Mark. I mean, that answers itself, because I made a choice and executed a choice. Whether it was the right or wrong one at the time is insignificant. It's what I felt was right at that time. So for me, we're back to the goal of a coach is to do the best you can with what you have in the present moment. And the score, yes, unfortunately, it does have an impact on our state and what we decide to do in games. But I'm trying to remove myself as much from that as possible so I can have a healthier perspective on what I feel, and we're back to the needs, on what I feel that player needs in that present moment. And that, for me, is the tricky journey and the conundrum of need-centered coaching.
I hate to do this to you, but I think the coaches' ears are burning listening to this. They got to know what you chose.
What I chose?
Did you foul or did you play D?
Oh, I'll tell you, I'm heavily influenced by a Serbian guy called Vlad Draskovic, because he was a performance director with national team here in the UK for a long time. He's no longer with us, but he really helped me through my formative years as a coach, and still does from afar. So I'm very grateful to him. He's a Serbian guy who's born and bred into basketball coaching in Eastern Europe and been very successful at what he's done. He said to me after the game, why didn't you foul? I chose not to foul. I chose to play it out because, Nick, looking back at it now, it was safer. I felt it was safer, where now I feel like, no, it's not safer. I was being defensive instead of being the aggressor. And right now, it's not because of Vladan or Mark, it's because Mike Rose, a coach, I would foul every time right now. Because why? It's the same principle and philosophy that Serbian performance director said to me after. Why didn't you foul? You didn't control the game. You were waiting and waiting and waiting. Whereas if you foul, you put them to the free throw line, they take the shots, and now you do something. So I elected not to foul. And if I was to do it again, I would foul every time in that situation. So I can control the we can control the game better.
Goes back to that, yeah. So it goes back to, Nick, that conversation after that game. I remember it well when Alan said, I think I made a mistake. That the reason I challenged Alan on, well, actually, in the moment with the data you had and what you knew, was it a mistake? And he said, well, no. I said, well, it was not a mistake then. You did not make a mistake. Now you have data afterwards that you can now go, in that situation, it comes up again, I'll do something differently. But actually, in the moment, it was a mistake. Now, if in the moment Alan thought, actually, I should go the other route, and he didn't back himself, then that was a mistake. Because actually, with the data he had, even though he knew it was the right thing to do, he went with another one. That's different. So this is important, because this is how we need to communicate with players as well. So we don't want players outcome-led, i.e., I've just lost that pass that didn't come off, the hoop didn't go in, whatever it was. No, I'm not interested. Talk to me about your choices and your execution, because we know it's not always going to come off, but we can learn from that. And also, importantly, and it links into another thing I want to discuss, Nick, is we never want to just talk to players or challenge them when they do something wrong, because all we're doing then is we're getting them to reflect on the very things we don't want them to repeat. Now, importantly, yes, we need to look at that, but if they do something exceptionally well they've never done before and it's been successful, a tactic, a choice, an execution, we need to be nailing on that as well. Talk to me about what just happened then. What made that so more successful than we've ever done before? Because I want you to repeat that. So do you understand what you did there to make that so successful? Now we're getting players to reflect on successful things they did that we want them to repeat. And also then it doesn't go, coach has asked me a question, I must have done something wrong. Where was I? Oh, it was a transition where it must have been this. Coach this. And the coach goes, great, you know, it's brilliant, well done. But actually, it was a learned answer. So we're not getting the players to think in the way we want them to. And this is where I use the same principles when I'm mentoring a coach as I want the coach to use with the players. Be relentless, listen really well, scan well, and then ask the right question if needed to get right to the point. Don't ask 10, 20, but actually get the coach to understand how to self-review anyway. So instead of me having to ask a bunch of questions or fill in the gaps, they're already self-reflecting. They'll give me some detailed, fast response, because now their brain is wired to being able to self-reflect effectively, not self-reflect emotionally, or not self-reflecting purely on the outcome. And I use the analogy of golf, Nick, great example with golf, is how many times we know the crazy game of golf, the golfers hit the ball and then they decide how good the shot was by where the ball ends up. Now, the problem with that is there are 20, 30 variables of why the ball went that way. And if we're so outcome-led, we're not understanding what's going on in the body in the swing. But actually, if we get to understand, right, bang, I've now committed. I know what's happened in the body. I committed to what I want to do. This is what I change. And now where the ball's gone as a backup, now we're in control. Now we know what's going on so we can change it. As opposed to guessing and then hoping, oh, I'm playing poor. Or let's see if I'm playing well today. Oh, I'm playing well, something's come off. And now we're in this very sticky, fragile state of I'm hoping I'm going to play well based on I'm reflecting on my outcomes to determine that for me. And that's, again, the negative emotional spirals. Same for a coach. No difference.
You know, for some reason, as I'm picturing Alan on the bench and deciding to make that call, whether to foul or defend it, just sort of reminds me, I think it's just an acknowledgement maybe that the position that the coach is in at the bench is probably one of the worst angles to see what's going on the floor. And so when you see a coach get really angry at a player and because he made a mistake, I would have to say, because I've done this, you go back and look at it from the high angle, like it didn't happen the way they thought it happened. And I feel like, I don't even know if this is a point to make, or certainly just a thing to throw out there, just so coaches need to understand a little bit better that, like, a lot of times you don't even see what's going on there. In American football, they have a coach with a headset and he's way up there looking down and radioing down, telling him what's going on. I mean, granted, the field is much bigger, so that's one of the reasons, but the concept is there. And I wonder if that's going to happen in basketball too, but I feel like that's also what gets the emotional state sort of out of whack because it's just so chaotic, it's so fast. You can't see really with big bodies running around from that one area on the bench, and yet you're going to try and you have to scan and figure out what's happening.
You know,
yeah, and also with that, Nick, is just want to make the point of everything that we want a player to do in the game, we've got to challenge them and stretch them in practice. So if we want a player to actually see a space or a gap and understand, I'm going to make the choice to dribble that, to pass it, or whatever it's going to be, or shoot, it doesn't matter. I want to force them into scenarios, and then I want them to validate their choices in practice. So this is the critical element. So what we end up doing often in practice, we're telling them what to do. We're shouting and narrating when they're doing it, and then go, right, you should have done this, next time do that. Yes, coach, no, coach. And then we get really frustrated when they don't do exactly what we want them to do in the game based on, like you say, what we saw. And then we're never establishing to the player, what did you see? Because we're so now irate, we're just now venting at the player. Now the player's going, I didn't even see that. Why is it going there? I didn't even see the space. So it's important that every single skill and mindset we want a player to do live under pressure, we need to upskill them in practice. Even that question, like you said, if a player comes off on a bench, we give them that little time, and we do this, Alan, with assistant coaches, lead coach, head coach is looking at the game, and he's still scanning the game. The assistant's coach role then is when the player sits down, give them that few seconds, and they go, okay, review, talk to me what happened. And now we're getting the player, because we've practiced it in practice, they can go, okay, this is what I saw, and this is why I made this choice. Would you change anything next time? What about the execution? Now there's a dialogue because there's referencing. If we don't train players to do that, they'll sit on the bench. They'll just be negative spiraling based on an outcome. You ask them a question, you'll get no detailed response other than you'll get nothing. And then you end up just either let's ignore them because they're looking like they're really lost it, or let's shout at them, hoping that some magic's going to happen and they're going to play really well because I'm shouting at them. Alan, did you say you had something there?
I was just going to pick up on something you said a bit earlier, Mark, and I guess you'll unpick what the non-negotiables are a little bit later at some point. But, you talked about us as coaches, how we communicate with the players. And we ask them first so we can assess what their thinking is. But you said we asked them a lot about to review what they did and the outcome of what they did. And, what underpins probably all of that is like the level of commitment, So I think I just want to share with Nick, I guess, which again might bring it to life a bit more from a practical sense, that, I talked to you earlier about that our guys have permission to call timeouts in the practice. But obviously there's parameters around that. Otherwise it becomes players calling a timeout used as a crutch. So when they get beat on defense, timeout, to save face or whatever. And we've put in parameters where you say, right, you have one timeout, this 20-minute segment or this 15-minute segment, or two timeouts, and the first one's going to be 30 seconds. The next one's going to be 20 seconds or 10 seconds. So we'll put different boundaries around it for different reasons. But what we told our guys these past few years is you are not allowed to review the tactical execution unless you have nailed the commitment. And that's something I got from Mark, and I'll unpick it a little bit more, I'll unbox it a little bit more. So what are we asking the players to focus on primarily? It's a simple order of priority, and it's a simple logical process if you think about it. We're asking them to first fully commit to the choice they make in the moment, and then consider and review the execution of what they chose to do. Why? Because if we're just continuing to review what players did and they're doing it at a 50% effort level, then what are we reviewing? We're reviewing a subpar effort. And what are we building if we're continuing to, not acknowledge your level of commitment and continue just to talk about the technical, tactical with them? So for our guys last year, and the import players find it crazy the past 2 years, and it takes me a while to get them to understand the value. But when I bring up a video and I show them, well, here's you when you don't commit, here's you when you do make a full commitment, which player is going to have a bigger contract next year or go further in his career? Who's more appealing to a coach who's going to come into this practice and watch you? Which player is on a journey of excellence and which player is a participation player, really? And the thing I say to them is this, Nick, and they find it a bit crazy when I originally say the statement. Again, Mark, you influenced this, so you know where I'm going with it. I said to them, you guys have to earn the right for me to coach you tactically. So I'll say that again. I say to the guys, you have to earn and for the pro guys, it's really strange. For the academy kids, it's easy because they're easier to mold. They have less filter and less pre-wiring, let's say. I say to them, you have to earn the right for me to coach you tactically. What does that mean? That means any choice you make on the court is not a wrong choice. All it is the choice you made at that moment in time. And success for me right now at this early stage success for me is you fully committing to the choice you make. So if you're going to come off a screen and you decide to tight curl it, you need to tight curl it and run through somebody's body if that's what you chose to do. Now, upon reflection and review, you might want to come off it at a different angle and flare it because of what the defense did. But the first step that we always discuss, and it could be a 2 second, it's literally 1 second. Right, boys, did we fully commit? Yes, right, bang. Tell me about your execution. Talk me through what you did. Talk me through what would you do differently next time. Hey, coach, I nailed it. Bang, good. Show me. Go again. And it's short, sharp, discussion. And what Mark really helped me was, Mark would be on my tail in some practices in the early days. Mark, I don't know if you remember, above in Oakland's College, he'd be on my tail, and I was really uncomfortable because I'm trying to figure out like what the players are doing, and Mark's probing questions in my head. What an accelerated learning process that was. Because I was under pressure, but healthy pressure, healthy stress. But it was very much based around, are they fully committing? Is this I like to say 8 out of 10. Is this their 8 or 9 out of 10? Because, I think for them to give a 10 out of 10 all the time is probably not humanly possible, but we strive for that. We strive for excellence. But I just wanted to pick up on that point, Mark, briefly before we started talking about what that review process looks like and what underpins it, the review of the commitment first.
Yeah, so if you think about it, Nick, is any coach that, whether they agree with this or disagree with it, would not agree with the simple fact of the teams that perform the best, they commit to every decision. Transition, they sprint back quicker than anyone else. They've lost the ball, they get into the next position quicker than someone else. They just commit to everything. And that's being relentless. So if you think about that, then that has to be priority number one. Now, we've got to look at what's going to kill that. Well, killing it is not understanding your role, so being uncomfortable, not really knowing about the choices, so you're thinking, is this right or wrong? Managing your state, scanning well, and then backing yourself and taking away the theory and practice to go, look, as long as you're committing, we can review that. But if it's a no, back out again. We're not talking. You have to earn the right to talk tech-tac. You earn it by committing to every choice you make. So we have to be relentless with that. Now, here's the challenge. With coaches that have designed this practice out of all these technical and tactical elements, and you're saying you can't cover them unless they start committing, unless they're sprinting, unless they're doing those things, and this is important, we pre-agree with them, the value of it and what they look like, what will be unacceptable, what will be exceptional, then we can't hold them accountable. But once we've agreed it and the players see it, we're scanning for that the whole time. So this is, again, where it becomes difficult. And even I've come in with sessions last season with Alan, and I'm stepped back and I whisper in Alan's ear and says, Alan, they're not committing here. They're not sprinting back. Because it's so difficult for a coach to always look split second. Are they committing? Are they sprinting? Are they passing? Are their hands up in the defense in the way I want them to? All these things, are they ahead? Are they looking? Before I get caught in looking at the technical execution. But that's the key. That's the key to the best teams in the world. That's the best teams and age group teams. That's what they do better than anyone else. So we've got to get coaches to get, I now buy into that, Mark. And now you're asking me to do it. I'm uncomfortable doing it every single time because I want to cover this content on my lesson plan. I want to cover this content. But the reality is we challenge again, say, if your players are not committing to those things, if you're allowing them to develop a habit of not committing, what's going to happen in a game? Close game, your opposition's committing to everything, you're not. Who's going to come out on top? So how important is player committing to the choices they make? 100%. Okay. So how relentless are you in breaking the bad habit they've got now? Now we've recognized they don't do that. How committed are you to being relentless to nail that? Once it's earned, the learning accelerates. Everything becomes easier. But having the courage as a coach to do that, knowing by doing that you're not going to cover the same level of content you wanted to, takes courage, takes that balls to go, I not only see the value in it, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do it long enough so it has the impact and not just for 5 minutes.
Well, Alan, let me ask you this. You're running a drill that's a full court drill where they have to sprint and get back, and it's a defensive drill or something, and they're not doing it, okay? Typical coach, blow the whistle, slam the ball down as hard as you can on the ground, start screaming, yelling, waving his hands. You're not running hard. Maybe you're even making them run some suicides or something like that, to enforce what he wants. What would you do?
Well, first of all, I've done what you've described, and I've been that for sure. We're back to now, what are you doing with the players on the sideline? So let's say it's a 5-on-5 drill like you described. Well, in our practices, I'm lucky that we'll have 14 because we bring players up on a pathway. But even if you have 12, let's say it doesn't matter. If there's one guy on the sideline, what are we doing with that guy on the sideline? We're in the drill and just ignoring him, or he's part of the practice, or she's part of the practice. I'll use the he, gender he, because that's what I call it, coach males. So what are we doing with that guy? And for me, if that situation occurs, I've gone away from me stepping in to actually stopping the drill, highlighting what the problem is, and then just resetting them or punishing them as you described. So what I do now, Nick, is I go to that player on the side and I say to him, what are you seeing? What are your thoughts about our non-negotiables? And let's say this year our non-negotiables were 3 things, Nick. The first one, and the players chose them. First one was commit, fully commit to what you do in the moment, each moment. The second non-negotiable was effective communication. And Mark has picked up a little bit about what that is and could unpick it a little bit more later. And then the third one was positive touches. We need to touch every time. In any moment somebody says anything to you, give a thumbs up if you're in transition, give a hand touch if you're close enough. All the time, positive touches. So I say to that person on the sideline, well, where do you think we are at right now with our non-negotiables, acceptable or unacceptable? And if it's like what you described and he says to me it's unacceptable, I'll just simply say, what are you going to do about it? And then it basically, the ownership is, you're shifting the dial from being dependent on me as the coach to now you being an independent athlete. It's another way to layer it and give them the tools or sharpen their tools with that concept.
Is everybody listening to this exchange while this is going on?
No, because they're in action, like you said. So now you've put a responsibility, and this is where it's different for different people, Nick, right? And now this is where Mark's rule of 3 comes into play. So I asked the player this question. Let's give the 2 scenarios. Player identifies, like for us this year, 17-year-old playing on the pro team, David Chive, incredible communicator, but I've instilled these principles with him since he was 12 years old, since he was 12, 13 years old. And he was our best 17 playing on a pro men's team, guys out of college, guys coming from overseas, Spain, Australia. He was one of our better leaders because he was well versed in these concepts and principles that Mark has helped me with the PDS way, let's say. And with him, he would simply go, I got this, coach. And he would step on the court, go, whoa, 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 time out, time out. Everyone in, hey, guys, right now, we're just dragging our butts up and down this floor. It's unacceptable. We reset, we go again. And he'd give a high five to the closest guy, and bang, we go again. Now, let's look at the opposite end of that spectrum. We've had players this year and every year where that's a difficult step for them. That's a hard step for them to take. So I would still have the conversation. And somebody may not be brave enough to do it early on. Nick, I would back myself and tell you within a month, within weeks, I'll have every player in that gym confident enough to do that. And now we got to ask the question, why? Because I'll recognize that he's needs to be an effective communicator. He needs to be a better leader. He needs to have more confidence in himself. And I'll invest time with him in a one-to-one basis away from the court. And we'll use a stepping stone process where I'll set him up to be talking in small groups. And we'll build up to it. So the first stage for a player like that, in that situation, I would still ask him, what are you seeing? Because I want to see what he sees. And I would ask him, are you feel comfortable enough now? Do you feel safe enough now to call this time out? If he says no, I'm fine with it. I'm now stepping in as the coach with the solution, as Mark says a while ago. So it's not always the players have to take ownership because, at the end of the day, we don't turn up to practice and we let them do it themselves. So now that player needs me to take control. So I take control of it. I bring him in and say, right, guys, first of all, it's a bit like my timeouts, Nick. I would say to them this, guys, why did I call a timeout? As soon as I call a timeout, bang, guys, tell me, give them some time to digest, get them in there, 10 seconds, water. Right, guys, tell me why I call this timeout. If the opposition coach calls a timeout, call him in and say, right, guys, why has he called that timeout right now? And we shape our timeouts from there. I would approach it the same way in this practice with that player. If we're at the rule of 3 and now I'm the coach taking over because he can't problem solve that one, I call him in and say, guys, tell me quick, why did I stop the practice right now? And they generally know. Because you've set the standards. You've set the stall from day one when you do that whiteboard activity. A lot of that facilitates your session to say what's acceptable and unacceptable in that practice. And it would be unacceptable for them to stand there and be silent when they know the solution. So that's how I would approach it, Nick.
So there you have it, sports fans. That's episode 3. An unbelievable amount of great information there. So really try and absorb this if you're a coach at every level, at every sport. And don't miss episode 4 with even more information packed into it. And then our live Q&A coming up on May 8th. Don't miss any of that. And thanks for being here. And don't forget, at B-Ball Breakdown, we're not a channel, we're a conversation. You in?